Okay, hello. I'd like to welcome everybody to the September meeting of the Buzzards Bay Action Committee. Today we have our guest speaker, Greg Berman, who's a coastal processes specialist from Woods Hole Sea Grant, Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, and he's here to discuss their latest publication, the Homeowner's Handbook to Prepare for Coastal Hazards. So before he comes out, though, I'd like to just give a quick round table of the people that are here for our speaker so he knows who his audience is. So I'll start. I'm the Wareham representative to the committee, Wareham representative to the Buzzards Bay Action Committee, Dave Pichette.
Craig Dutra, Town of Westport.
Nick Nicholson, Town of Mattapoisett.
Jen McKay, Town of Falmouth.
Jeffrey Rosovich, Town of Bay.
Michael Riley, Town of Dartmouth.
Ann Rodney, EPA Regional in Boston.
Joe Costa, Buzzards Bay National Trade Program, Coastal Zone Management.
Andy Bobola, Building Commissioner, Town of Mattapoisett.
Jim Mayer, Building Commissioner, Town of Acushnet.
Marilyn Kelly, Conservation Agent, Town of Acushnet.
Alan Slavin, Town of Wareham.
Dave Janik, Coastal Zone Management.
Laurel Farranon, Town of Rochester.
And Jim Ritchie, City of New Bedford.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to have Greg Berman come up and take the floor.
Thank you very much for having me. As Dave said, I'll be talking mostly about the Homeowner's Handbook to Prepare for Coastal Hazards. This was an initiative that began throughout the Sea Grant community. We have sea grants in most of the coastal states. This particular one started off in Hawaii, kind of skipping a lot of the West Coast, going down to the Gulf region where they obviously have a lot of storm impacts, and now it's working its way up here, and we adapt and update as it moves into each new area. So for this talk, I'll get a little bit into what we do with the Marine Extension Program, then get into the rationale behind why we thought this handbook would be a good idea for Massachusetts, and then a brief overview of what's in the handbook, what it can be used for. And so I'm with Woods Hole Sea Grant and Barnstable County, which is Cape Cod Cooperative Extension. And there's three main sectors within the Woods Hole Sea Grant portion of that. Research, we do a variety of research grants for projects, and our director, Judith McDowell, is in charge of that. We do education and outreach, and the extension program. That's where we have the joint program between Woods Hole Sea Grant and the county extension. So we have a variety of jointly funded positions, some of which are in fisheries and aquaculture. I'm the sole representative for coastal geology, coastal processes, and then we also have some marine debris extension. We do a variety of publications. Some of the more recent ones are the Homeowner's Handbook. The hurricane versus nor'easter kind of goes along with that. I have one of the newer ones in the back also, What's That Sticking Out of the Sand? After all the recent winter storms, we have a lot of exposed stratigraphic layers that haven't been exposed in quite some time. It's a good excuse to answer that question, what is that sticking out of the beach? And then kind of the processes about how it formed and why it's in its current position. We also have a variety of signs, like these dudes aren't made for walking signs. They're fairly ubiquitous, at least on Cape Cod and a lot of southeast Massachusetts. And then we have some of the rip current signage and other publications we've put out, like longshore sediment transport around Barnstable County. It's an overview of the net sediment transport direction. It doesn't give volumes, but it gives the overall average over the course of a year or several years direction in any given location on the Cape. We've helped Pleasant Bay Alliance with their Coastal Resource Guide, mainly an accumulation of data and information studies that can then go to help to provide assistance for them making management decisions. So moving into the rationale for the Homeowner's Handbook, there's a lot of talk about increased storm frequency and power. And when we're talking about some of the damage from the storm, one of the things to think about is waves and surge. Waves are pretty easily understandable, but the surge is what gets the waves high enough or farther enough inland to actually do the damage. So a lot of it has to do with the steepness of the shelf, continental shelf, and even finer scale as you approach an area. This particular example shows a wide, shallow shelf may produce about a 20-foot storm surge, whereas if it drops off more quickly, you may only get a 9-foot. Buzzards Bay, everyone here is obviously very aware of the vulnerability to surge as storms get funneled up within the bay, especially after Bob and some of the other storms. So here's just an example of a storm moving through a system. The red is an increase in surge, and then the blue and then white is the decrease. So as it's approaching Florida, this is Hurricane Andrew, you can see a little bit of surge as it gets rotated in that direction. An interesting thing is as it's approaching the other coast, you're actually going to draw down of water here. It's moving away and getting pushed up on the other side. So a few of the more damaging storms to our particular area. The big one was the Great Colonial Hurricane of 1635. Can't really quantify the deaths, and they didn't really measure things in millions of dollars back then. But the storm surge was over 6 feet according to this image, which is the hindcast slosh sea land, the estimate of surge in that particular area. So you can see these warmer colors mean it's a higher surge. A couple things I would point out from this is it says it goes up to at least 6 feet. I would say it's significantly more than 6 feet. This is just the best the model can estimate. And then, of course, the Cape Cod Canal wasn't even there back then, so that wasn't the issue in that area. We get a little bit more accurate when we get into 1938. It was a Category 5 way down in Puerto Rico. It was only Category 3 when it made landfall up here. But we still had around 600 deaths and over 300 million damage in the U.S. Here's the surge as it approaches. It's moving up, and you can see it's accentuating itself within those estuarine systems, including Buzzards Bay. Here's the storm track as it passed. It hit to the west of Massachusetts, which allows that rotation, forcing it up within the bay. And you can see all the reds are up near the peaks, very close to where we are right now. Hurricane Bob, this is in more recent memory, in a lot of our memories, that the rotation hit very close and was one of the worst track directions for Buzzards Bay itself. There were only 6 deaths, which is still too many, but you can see it's getting much more expensive as we go through time, 680 million worth of damage. Storm surges could have been 10 to 15 feet in a lot of areas. And the thing with hurricanes versus nor'easters is they can be very, well, not very, relatively small compared to the nor'easter. So you can get very punctuated and discrete damage. So you can get a lot of damage within the bay itself. You might not get as much damage out here. And the actual location, you get rotation here. So we're typically more vulnerable to hurricanes versus nor'easter surge and wind damage within Buzzards Bay. That northeast direction isn't going to build as much surge during the winter, but we still have the damages from the some flooding, snow, ice, trees down especially. So what happens more on the outer coast? We don't get that within Buzzards Bay as much, but when you start looking at a barrier beach, here it is pre and post Ivan back in 2004. This is in the Gulf Coast. This red shows an area of erosion along a barrier beach, and while this area eroded, it got pushed over here onto the back dune area. So this is how beaches migrate over time. The front beach gets lost and it gets pushed to the back. These red dots are houses that were moved, so that's still significant damage even when the processes are working the way they're naturally intended. Here we are in 2005, right after Katrina. This particular beach was not able to kind of keep up with these repeated high-intensity storms in the same location. This is what's known as a threshold crossing, that you're not just building up the beach here, you pretty much wiped out the beach and you're moving all that material over into the sound itself in overwash fans. So here's just an aerial photograph of what that looks like. So it still holds true that When you're talking about this kind of repeated period of intense storms, you're more likely to cause damage that takes significantly longer for the natural processes to recover from. But what's happening in our area? This particular data set came from the NOAA National Climate Data Center, and what I did was I popped a dot right there on Buzzards Bay. I did a radius around to capture all the storms that have been through the area since they started collecting the data back in the 1800s. So the different colors indicate different intensities. The reds are the intensity 3s. We really don't get many 4 or 5 hurricanes come through here. But you can see there's just, again, a significant number of storms. What I did was I brought that into a database and started extracting. This isn't the number of storms, but it's the amount of time in hours that that storm was above a certain intensity. So it's not just what it was at landfall, it's if it was at Category 5 offshore, not causing any damage, it could have been inshore. So we're still looking at kind of the theoretical damage potential of that particular storm. And here, again, we have the color gradations. You can see we're starting about in the 1850s, moving to current, and there's a general upward trend. It's not too clear, but if you think back, I mean, trying to form one line out of that doesn't work too well. But when you start talking about polynomials, you get kind of a wavy line versus a straight line. And when we look just at the more intense hurricanes, this just looks at the Category 3 and above, 3, 4, and 5. We see a certain periodicity to the storm intensity. So it's harder to tell back here, but you're not really seeing many of the Category 5s. Over here, we're starting a cycle where you have a decent amount of high-intensity hurricanes moving into a lower intensity, and right now we're in another high intensity. And a lot of this has to do with something called the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. This is really only about a 1 degree change in Fahrenheit of sea surface temperatures in certain areas, but you can see even a small change can have a fairly big effect. This warming period, this cooling period, and we're not even at the end of this warming period. So this is one of the many, many things that NOAA takes into account when they start putting these hurricane predictions out there. And even though it's been a fairly quiet season so far, Sandy came in October. And one of the things about Sandy is it kind of made a button hook to the left. It was very unusual. Typically, it would have gone a much straighter path. And we may have had another high color right at the end of our season right there. So that was the past and present. What's it going to look like in the future? Well, there's a lot of very interesting and new research being done, and most of it is showing it's going to be more intense and more frequent storms. But here's what the different models look like. I'll try to explain just some of the key points of these graphs. This particular graph is the frequency. This one's the intensity. We won't worry about power dissipation right now. So this is how frequent we're having tropical cyclones. And each one of the colors is a different model. So they're using European models, they're using NOAA models, and each one of these is slightly different. There's even different positive versus negative, whether it's going to be more frequent or less frequent. Over here is the intensity that you're seeing, again, a change in the actual values, but some are significantly more intense, some are less intense. One of the things about this data that is tough to swallow, and it's getting better very soon. There's some new research coming out for what's going to happen 100 years out. This is still 200 years out. So the data wasn't there to be able to quantify what's going to happen within 100 years, but they're fairly sure, or at least as sure as this kind of disagreement can be about what's going to happen in 200 years. This particular example down here is just looking at what's going to happen to hurricane intensity and surge intensity as sea level rises. So here we are with our current vulnerability. This is meters of surge, and what this is was synthetic hurricanes, which they build a hurricane in a computer, and that way they can run thousands and thousands of hurricanes instead of just looking at historical hurricanes. And what we have here is, you can see, a lot of the surge potential is up within Buzzards Bay. And then when you start looking at adding 1.5 meters of sea level rise on top of that, which whether it happens in 100 or 200 years, the Buzzards Bay area gets a lot worse, and a lot of the other areas are feeling the intensity that Buzzards Bay had for vulnerability currently. What I'm going to look at right now is these two images and try to take it a little bit more into common language. Looking at kind of the best case and worst case scenarios between those models. This green one here is a European model. This yellow one is the NOAA model. And what we're looking at here is here's the green European, here's the yellow NOAA. And even though this shows a reduction in the number of cyclones, you can see there's still an increase in the number of hurricanes and major hurricanes over the current historical data. So right here we're looking at hurricanes per decade. We're looking at around 2 or 3, and then you're bumping up to 4, over here 5, 6, that kind of range. But the main thing to take away here, even the best case scenario is still worse than it is right now. Moving into some local examples, here we are, hopefully right around here. And one of the neat tools out right now is the NOAA Sea Level Rise Viewer. And I'm just going to pop that up to this area. So here's what it looks like. It's one of those fill the bathtub models, which has a lot of issues, especially when you get out on the open coast, about marsh migration, about the way natural coastal resource areas respond to storms. They don't act like filling bathtub. When you're actually looking within highly developed areas with seawalls, and sometimes up in these estuarine areas, it's a little bit more valid to look there than certainly like Monomoy, Nauset area. So here we are at the current high tide. Here you can add a foot of sea level rise, 2 feet of sea level rise, 3 feet, and you can see you're getting more flooding, and this is everyday flooding versus punctuated storm flooding. And then you can take it all the way to 6 feet. They don't define what that time frame is, whether it's 10, 50, 500 years. That's for you to make your own current decision about. And then BuzzardsBay.org has a great tool with looking at the current and projected storm surge risk. And the thing to look at here is the green is the current floodplain vulnerability, that 1% chance in any given year of having a storm to flood to that level. And looking at this green area, it already vastly exceeds 6 feet of sea level rise. So the thing to take into account is what happens when you start adding sea level rise to your storm surge, because you're already in an area that is very vulnerable for storms just because of its location. And then you start adding even a foot of sea level rise, puts it past some of the highways and puts those areas in additional danger. The thing to think about is storms versus long-term sea level rise. If Sandy comes in, the particular example here is from Boston. It's the difference between the projected and actual. Luckily, it wasn't at the peak high tide when this maximum happened, but it was about a little bit over 4 feet of storm surge at that tide gauge. So what you're looking at is within a certain number of years, whether it's 100 years, you think it might be 3 or 4 feet, that's Hurricane Sandy hitting every high tide versus once every periodicity, whether that's a 100-year storm, 500-year storm. Here's just some examples of some of the damage that Sandy did on over on Cape Cod. We've got a couple of spots in Mashpee. Here we are at Pompanesett Spit. That here it is before, here it is after. A lot of barrier beach breaching. And here we are over on South Cape Beach. They put a sacrificial sand berm down there, which may have saved some of the parking lot, but certainly not all of the parking lot. Here we are during the early February nor'easter. Flooding is still a major issue during nor'easters. It has a lot to do with where you are. This is up on the Cape Cod Bay shoreline, right on the Dennis Brewster line. and there's significant flooding. Obviously, when you have an emergency on one side and emergency services on the other, they need to take into account how current storm vulnerability and increased sea level rise may affect that. Getting into adaptation, kind of the previous methodology back in the 30s, 40s, early part of the 1900s was an attitude that we can do it. We can build and kind of push through and defeat these storms and sea level rise to some extent. And that's when a lot of revetments and storm gates were formed. The present method has a variety, and I don't think we really have time to get into everything that's being done on Cape. It goes from the do nothing, with letting nature take its course, to retreat, to planning, but there's a more emphasis on softer alternatives versus the coastal engineering structures. It tends to fall under two kind of categories, the carrot and the stick. That one example from Hull is they put a $500 incentive to raise freeboard more than required. So that's the carrot. The stick is additional bylaw and regulations saying that you're not going to be able to do certain things on areas that are more vulnerable towards storms and this kind of flooding. Now, looking at adaptation again, there's some things that governments are good at doing. One of which is putting that kind of, we need more freeboard. So how are we going to do it? Do we want to incentivize it? Do we want to do more bylaws, more regulations? And just one example of freeboard, here's Southeast Massachusetts. Eventually, if you have an eroding beach and rising sea level, we're not going to be able to survive just with freeboard. At some kind of time scale, I mean, retreat has to come into effect. Other governments that are literally swimming in money, they can maintain artificial shorelines. They're building, Abu Dhabi has dolphin islands, Dubai has palm tree islands, so they're reclaiming land from the water and building this up and putting massive population centers and economic drivers on there, much the way we did with the Jersey Shore. And after Sandy, while there was a lot of damage and very expensive damage, a lot of those dunes have already been rebuilt to try to preserve those economic drivers. So at some point there's going to be a cost-benefit analysis that shows it's not worth it anymore. Right now, for these particular governments and agencies, it is. Other things governments can do is transfer of development rights. I throw this one in here just as a neat idea that Carl has an issue with increased acidity from the CO2 in the atmosphere. There's some studies out there showing that you can actually, by increasing the nutrient flow and food for the coral, you can mitigate somewhat for the coral increased acidity, but it's just a wide variety of things that the individual person is not going to do what the government's going to do. One of the main rationales for the handbook was looking at individual responsibility. So this is not, what's the government going to do for me? This is, what can I do to help prepare myself, my family, my house for a storm when it's going to happen. Here's just a quick look. We have plenty of extra copies back there of the handbook. Thanks, Dave. That feel free to divvy those up when you leave. These are pretty much all we have left of the original print run, but please feel free to take them. So we did about 5,000 copies for that first print run. We did the announcement during a National Hurricane Preparedness Week. We gave away half to 2/3 of them within that first week. So this was admittedly a fairly small run at 5,000 to see how they would do, and I guess the price was right at free because they went very quickly. Just a quick overview. You can obviously go through this yourself, but I just kind of want to step through each one of the parts and what's in it, what's the rationale behind it. The introduction is just getting people involved, things you can do, talking about that you need to take an active role. You can't just sit there and hope someone else rescues you. You need to have a plan. We have myths, common myths. I forget the exact number we have, but I survived this hurricane, so I should be fine. And then we have the why that may not actually be true, right under each one of those myths. Part 2, we get into the natural hazards. We look at coastal flooding, we look at hurricanes, we look at nor'easters. We talk a little bit about kind of the general science, the vulnerable areas as a storm approaches the coastline. We go through a series of local hurricanes, local storms, not just hurricanes, but the nor'easters also, that have hit southeast Massachusetts, that have hit Boston, to be able to tie into the memories, if not of the current generation, possibly the last generation, or at least putting some information behind the stories that people have heard about some of these older storms. The hurricane of 1938, we saw that slosh model, but they still have nice black and white images of some of that impact. One of the main issues was that there really wasn't a notification that that hurricane was coming. We didn't have that kind of information. Then Carolyn and Edna, Bob, we even got Sandy in there. And then the nor'easters from that winter went in there also. Next, protecting yourself and your family. And we try to go through it step by step, like, what's the most important thing? Well, you need to protect yourself so you can protect your family. Your family is the most important thing. So you start talking about what's an emergency preparedness kit. Are you going to stay in place? Are you going to leave? If you're going to leave, think about the traffic plans. Do you have to take a ferry? Do you have to take a bridge? And we call out the Cape Cod traffic plan is one of the things that you may need to think about if you're attempting to leave certain areas. And then the emergency notification systems. We put a lot of links to the websites, how to sign up for them, where to find these kinds of notifications. The protecting your property part. I'm not a builder, I'm not an engineer. A lot of this came from other folks. If you have specific questions, we may have to refer back, but it talks a lot about getting to know your property. Where is it? Is it in the floodplain? If it's in the floodplain, how deep are you expected to flood in a 100-year storm? What kind of hazards have hit in the past? What are projected to be in the future? How and when your house was built, are you maintaining it? How can you possibly strengthen your house if it was built before certain codes? We have a lot of links to FEMA worksheets, some information out of there, like the continuous load path. If you don't want your roof to lift off, you need to make sure it's tied all the way back down into the ground, whatever your basement may or may not be. We talk about the wind and rain resistant envelope, that if you have a closed system and the wind hits, it goes around, but as soon as you have a door or window blow through, you're pushing from the inside of the house instead of just on one side. You make double the effect. It's when a lot of roofs blow off, a lot of damage happens very quickly. And then some of the lower cost things that a homeowner may be able to do themselves and what they may want to get a contractor to do. Hurricane clips, especially in Hawaii, they just didn't have hurricane clips and everybody's roof was flying off. Very low cost method, and a lot of older houses built before those codes got put in. This is one of our tables showing types of protection. It can vary from shutters, from certain types of garages, and we talk about the pros, the cons, and then a general estimate of the cost, trying to get a feel for, well, plywood's the cheapest, but if you leave it in the basement, it can warp. You got to take care of it certain ways, and just some of the other methods you might want to use. We talked a bit about insurance. We didn't at the time get into the updated floodplains that are kind of just coming into effect now, and also the Buzzards Water Act of 2012. We probably will for the next print run, just because it is a major impact to the flood insurance program. But we talk about the flood insurance program, we talk about the most important thing is knowing what kind of insurance you have. Do you have flood insurance? If you don't have flood insurance, you obviously don't need it for a mortgage, but do you want it just in case? And there are cheaper types of flood insurance if you're not required to have it for your mortgage. And then some of the pre-disaster activities, how you can protect your home, some of the insurance breaks that might be available. At the end, we get a little bit about into climate change, just because houses, especially newly built houses, are intended to be long life structures, whether they last 50, 70, or 100 years. When you start talking about that kind of time frame, sea level rise becomes an issue. It's only about 1/10 of an inch per year right now. It's projected to get higher into the future, but even at the historic rate, you're getting about 1 foot per 100 years. So what could that increased floodplain mean for what you're building now and the property that you're looking at? We talk a lot about some of the tables that have been put out there to talk about what's likely, how likely is it, what are some of the things that people should be concerned about living on the coast. Some of the drought and extreme heat, sea level rise is important, the increase in coastal storms, the look at historic versus current versus projected sea level rise. And then when you get to the end of the book, this is one thing I have never been a strong believer in hard copy, especially in this day and age. We have PDFs of all these handbooks on a lot. You look at the logos on the inside cover, most of them have that online that you can get the PDF. We have these appendices in the back to do some preparation before the storm, but additionally, if you've lost internet or if you've lost power, here's some of the information that you can add to it yourself for your local area, but you can still have this information without power and internet that a lot of people these days may have become a little extra dependent on. What we have emergency contact information, we have shelter information, we have a little bit at the end about trying to get to know your property a little bit better, coastal construction checklist, just kind of walking you through things you should try to be asking about your property. And what's next? Obviously another print run. We went through those first copies very quickly. If we have a couple of partners lined up to try to get funding and grants for the next run. If anybody has ideas about where more money may come from, please feel free to get in touch. When we put the first steering committee together, some of the first things were, well, who else needs to be on board for the technical review committee? If anybody here would like to be on that committee or like to recommend someone for the next print run, please get in touch with me. And then also I'm looking into CRS credits. Some of the other folks were able to get FEMA to accept this handbook as public information outreach, which actually provides them CRS credits, community rating system credits. So this is as we're moving forward, but hopefully some of these credits could be applied to communities in Massachusetts that a few more points may bump them up to a next level and get folks potentially a reduction in their insurance costs, especially at the same time that insurance costs are going way up because of the updated floodplains and the Buzzards Water Act, which really is just trying to get the system closer to actuarial rates instead of those grandfathered and subsidized rates. And with that, we can take any questions. I just have a few keep in mind things for building at the end, and feel free to take copies at the end.
Does anybody have any questions for Greg?
Greg, I just want to, I'm glad you brought up CRS because none of our communities participate in it, and very few in Massachusetts do, and I think that's something that's very important for us to promote, because a lot of the things that are in CRS are also beneficial to the environment in lots of different ways. So I just want to chime in and put a plug in for it.
Yeah, and it is a tough call. I've heard arguments made from both directions. Most of the things you get CRS credits for are common sense, good for the environment, good for sustainability, good for protection of individual homeowners. Some of the towns I've heard that actually made the conscious decision not to go for a CRS is we don't want to encourage people living in these areas by helping reduce their insurance. It's really a town-by-town call, but no, I mean, it's not a decision for me to make. Each town needs to make their own decision, but there are pros and cons. One of the things that I would bring up now is any way to reduce insurance will probably be very appreciated by most of your homeowners, especially in the current situation with updates and actuarial rates.
I was going to say some of the things that CRS can prevent additional development.
Yes.
Certain things if you adopt. Again, it's what the town chooses to adopt, in which direction they go. And some towns like Chatham have gone, or Oak Bluffs have gone in a very strong direction to try to minimize new development in the most vulnerable areas.
Right, and I mean, it is a very town-by-town decision basis. Webner, Point Bay National Mediterranean Research Reserve, is leading a committee or a task force, I'm not even sure anymore. But there's a coastal resiliency training workshop, but kind of in conjunction with that is going to be at least one workshop on CRS. So hopefully there will be a bit more talk about this in the future.
Anybody?
I'm sorry, one of the comments that I was thinking about as far as funding of the book, we have an educational material budget, and what I was thinking is that if there was a nominal fee associated with purchasing these for government bodies, most of us in the building department have a little bit of flexibility, and it might help offset some of the costs, a little bit anyways. May not get all of it, but some of it you might want to consider.
Yeah, that's definitely good to know. And we didn't reach out on the initial print run for that kind of assistance. We will need to find other partners as we start branching out. Just FYI, the particular formatting we used, the volume we did, it was just a little bit over $2 a copy. But obviously the first one was free, and as we get more partners, the cost goes down. But I mean, even a half or a quarter of that, if the town were to provide some assistance, we could certainly provide that many copies. That's, theoretically, as we line up the funding for the next print run. But yeah, thank you for letting me know about that.
Just one real quick question. Did you already say when you thought the next one might happen?
I get to think about that next week. I have a conference and 4 presentations this week. Next week, I'm going to start sending emails around to the previous technical review and steering committees. So again, if anyone has interest or recommendations, please get in touch with me soon. But that can be a process, just because I do think I want to get some updates in there instead of just another print run, but that might be something for the steering committee to talk about, because we are completely tapped on copies right now. But no, it is moving forward pretty quickly.
Anyway, my last question is I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but I never knew about this book. I'm sure there are a number of people in this audience that were familiar with it. And when the next one comes out available, how would people be aware that it's available and how to get it?
If you have specific methods or media in mind, please let me know. Some of the things we did for this was advertising through SEMCO, through NEMCO, a couple of the listservs for, that's one of the ones we host. We did press releases, and I think they had like a little tiny thing maybe in Cape Cod Times, some of the local. And most of these agencies, whether it certainly MEMA was good about it, trying to get information out there. If there are other venues to try to get that information out, I'd like to know them. But yeah, I mean, if there's, well, I always go to this website or this listserv, then we could add that to the next announcement.
One thing I'm going to do is get a PDF copy of this, post it on our town website.
Yeah, please do. I mean, the PDF copies, I think the inside cover shows a few places you can download it, so please feel free to download it. And one of the things that you may want to think about is if you download it, put it up there, just shoot us an email. In that case, when we do these updates, we'll let you know when the updated PDF comes out and give it to you, just so you'll have the most recent one. If not, you may not find out from the announcements and you have an old version up there. But no, please feel free. The more people who get the information, the better.